You've probably heard the name Rothschild, the European banking family that shaped wars, diplomacy, and financial systems. But far fewer people remember the family who played a similar role in the East. They were the Sassoons, refugees who rebuilt their lives through trade, and over generations became one of the most influential commercial families of their time. They built their fortune on products the world demanded, even when governments tried to restrict them. Long before globalization had a name, they learned how to operate across borders. Welcome to financial empire, where history, wealth, and power intersect, and where stories are rarely as straightforward as they seem. The Sassoon story doesn't start in London or New York. It begins in Baghdad, in the Ottoman Empire, at the start of the 19th century. David Sassoon, born in 1792, was the son of the treasurer to the Ottoman governor. For generations, his family served as successful Jewish merchants, operating trade routes from Basra to Persia. But financial success also made them politically vulnerable. When the leadership changed, the Sassoons fell out of favor, and persecution followed. In 1829, David fled Baghdad with only his family, his faith, and the trading knowledge he had grown up with. He eventually settled in Bombay, a busy port city under British rule. It wasn't the center of the empire, but it connected Britain's industry with Asian markets. For someone starting over, it was both a challenge and an opportunity. David Sassoon arrived without formal schooling, titles, or land. But he had what mattered most: experience. He understood the movement of goods long before people used terms like supply chain. He knew what British manufacturers needed, what India produced, and what China was willing to buy. And he understood a basic truth of trade. In unstable times, profit flows to those willing to stay when others withdraw. He began with modest goods: cotton, textiles, yarn, anything that could move through the port. But he took a different approach. Instead of working within a single community, he built trust across several cultures. He hired Jewish, Indian, and Arab merchants, operated in several languages, and believed relationships mattered as much as contracts. In a city divided by caste and colonial hierarchy, he built a network that crossed those boundaries. Then came the commodity that made him both wealthy and controversial: opium. The British East India Company had long controlled the production and trade of opium, exporting the drug grown in India to China, where addiction was widespread. Although the Chinese government banned it, demand persisted and smuggling continued. The trade was effectively a shadow economy of the 19th century, and Sassoon participated not as a street-level operator, but as a financier and organizer. He supplied capital, insurance, and logistics. His firm, David Sassoon and Company, became essential to Britain's commercial activity in China. By the 1840s, Sassoon ships sailed under the British flag, and his warehouses held goods headed across Asia. Critics pointed out that the trade caused real harm in China. Supporters argued that he was operating within the norms and laws of empire. Either way, the outcome was clear. David Sassoon became one of the wealthiest men in Asia. By the 1850s, he was financing local industry, developing ports, and opening mills in Bombay that employed thousands. He built synagogues, hospitals, and schools that still stand. He reinvested profits not only into trade, but into long-term infrastructure. His success came from understanding that profit alone wasn't enough. Lasting influence required building things that endured. This strategy proved effective. When the American Civil War cut off cotton supplies to Britain, Indian cotton became essential, and the Sassoons controlled much of it. When Chinese silver flows shifted global markets, they managed the financial adjustments. They turned global instability into opportunity. But success attracted competition. The East India Company saw them as rivals. Chinese officials resented foreign traders. Other merchant families tried to weaken their position. Still, the Sassoon network held firm, largely because it was built around family members placed across major trading centers. David sent his sons to Baghdad, Hong Kong, Shanghai, and London, each establishing a branch of the business. They operated not just as traders, but as representatives of the family's growing financial network. Wherever British influence expanded, the Sassoons followed, providing the capital that allowed trade to flow. When David Sassoon died in 1864, his wealth stretched across 3 continents. His sons had become respected financiers in London and Hong Kong. His eldest son, Elias David Sassoon, expanded deeply into China, opening offices in Shanghai and Hong Kong as those ports opened after the Opium Wars. Here, the Sassoon enterprise transitioned from trade into finance. Shanghai in the late 19th century was a complex city. Culturally Chinese but heavily shaped by foreign powers. Banks, shipping companies, and traders operated side by side. The Sassoons financed shipping, built warehouses, and purchased prime land along the Bund. By the 1880s, people called them the Rothschilds of the East, not because they matched European political influence, but because they built a similar strategy of mobility, networks, and capital. Another son, Albert Abdullah Sassoon, moved to Britain, earned a knighthood from Queen Victoria, and entered the British aristocracy. The family had come full circle, from refugees in Baghdad to aristocrats in London. Yet beneath their respectability, the foundation of their early fortune, the opium trade, remained controversial. After Britain's victory in the Second Opium War in 1860, Chinese ports were flooded with imported opium. Sassoon ships carried large quantities. It was legal under British law but deeply harmful within China. This contradiction defined much of the 19th century global economy. Moral debate on one side, profitable commerce on the other. The Sassoons didn't invent this reality. They operated within it and benefited from it. Their influence helped build railways, mills, and hospitals. But these advancements were tied to profits from a trade that left long-term consequences in China. This contrast is an essential part of their story. As the world entered the 20th century, the Sassoons evolved with it. Opium declined and global finance advanced. The family shifted into banking, real estate, and philanthropy. They built major buildings in Shanghai, luxury hotels in India, and investment houses in London. They became a symbol of respectability. But history remembers unevenly. Europe documented the Rothschilds extensively. The Sassoons, operating mostly in Asia, became far less known, even though their influence shaped global capitalism in important ways. What they created wasn't only wealth. It was a business model. A demonstration that commerce could operate across borders, that networks could be more powerful than nations, and that mobility could create advantage. By the early 20th century, their transformation was complete. The family that once traded cotton and opium now mingled with British elites. They supported museums, universities, and charities. Their homes in Bombay, Shanghai, and London displayed European architecture and design. In Shanghai, the younger generation expanded into banking, shipping, and real estate. Their company, Sassoon and Company, became one of Asia's leading firms. The Sassoon House, completed in 1929, remains one of Shanghai's landmark buildings. For decades, the Sassoons represented reliability. Through market crashes and political unrest, they adapted. They recognized an essential truth. Control over the movement of goods and credit often shapes economic outcomes. But the world was changing. Empires weakened, nationalism grew, and old trade routes became unstable. The 1929 crash shook global trade, hurting even diversified networks like theirs. They adapted by shifting investments, but the era of family-dominated trading dynasties was ending. Corporations replaced them. Global systems became more centralized, and the Sassoon advantage, family networks and personal trust, became less relevant. The decline wasn't sudden, but gradual. The end of the opium era, competition from industrial firms, political upheaval in China, and the approach of World War II all weakened their position. By the late 20th century, much of the Sassoon network had dissolved or been absorbed by larger institutions. The family continued in business and philanthropy, but the dynasty no longer held global influence. Still, their legacy shaped the modern world. They demonstrated how money can move independently of borders, how trade networks can become more influential than nations, and how families could leverage mobility and trust to build global reach. Their rise and decline highlight important lessons. Trade creates opportunity, systems change, and no network lasts forever. But the structures they helped build, in Mumbai, Shanghai, and London, remain visible today. Their story also raises deeper questions about the costs of profit, the consequences of imbalance, and the long-term impact of global trade systems. History often remembers the outcomes more than the brilliance behind them, because ultimately every system built on inequality eventually confronts its consequences, and the story of the Sassoons offers a reminder. Economic power shapes history, but it also carries responsibilities. If this perspective gave you something new to think about, subscribe. At Financial Empire, we explore the stories behind the systems that still shape our world.